Morning, everyone. I'm just going to give the participants a few minutes to log in and then we can get started. And I can see the numbers slowly going up, so we'll just give it another minute or so.
Hi everyone, is my sound and everything working?
Your sound's perfect.
Great, thanks.
Right, I think I will get started and then the participants can keep logging in. So, welcome to this morning's Muscle Matters online seminar for OPMD. I'm Neeru Nayak. I'm MD UK's Head of Information Advocacy and Support, and it's going to be my pleasure today to guide you through today's session. So our Muscle Matters seminars have become a regular feature in MD UK's calendar, and we're running 2 or 3 a month and focusing on a range of condition-specific topics. The sessions cover both the latest research developments and also managing and living with a condition. Each seminar provides an opportunity to ask your questions to leading experts. As well as these virtual seminars, we're looking forward to holding 2 general information and support days for everybody affected by muscle wasting conditions in March. So the first one is taking place in York on Saturday, the 4th of March. And the second one is in London on Friday, the 24th of March. Both are free and you can book your tickets and find out more information about the events on our website. There will also be these will be a great opportunity to come together with others and meet experts and the MD UK team. So do please book on these days and join us. Also, a reminder that our helpline remains open to anyone affected by muscle wasting conditions, and do please contact us if you have any questions or in need of support. We can help with information and can either support you directly or point you to where you can get the relevant support. The number and email address should be on your screens now, so you can call us on 0800 652 6352, or you can email us at info@musculardystrophyuk.org, and one of the team will be happy to support you. So we are grateful today to be joined by an expert panel covering a broad range of expertise on OPMD. We're also very grateful for the support of our sponsors this morning, PTC Therapeutics. We're splitting this session into 2 parts, and we'll begin by looking at research and then explore living with and managing the condition. Before we begin, just a note on how to ask questions or make comments throughout the session. We have advanced questions and we will seek to cover some of these. We'd also like to incorporate some live input. To do this, we'll be using the Q&A function. So please type in your question or comment and we'll feed them into the discussion. To help manage the technical side of the event, we won't be calling on questionnaires to ask their questions directly. Any questions we don't manage to cover and don't know the answer to, we will seek to answer through our website afterwards. And just an extra note, we've had a fantastic amount of questions come through in advance. So if we don't cover any of these in the session, we'll follow it up during this week, just so you can get the support and information you need. And finally, a reminder, we're recording this session, so it will be made available over the next few days. So to start off this morning, I'm delighted to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Andrea Gubas, who will introduce our research speakers and chair that part of the afternoon sessions. Over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Neeru. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Alberto Malerba to today's Muscle Matters seminar in OPMD. Dr. Malerba is a lecturer in gene therapy at Department of Biological Sciences Centre for Biomedical Sciences at Royal Holloway, University of London. He completed his PhD in biotechnologies at the Padua University, where he was studying the role of inflammation in muscle regeneration. Alberto then moved to London and joined the gene therapy laboratory at Royal Holloway, and since then he has contributed to the development of novel gene therapy agents and antisense therapeutics for the treatment of muscular dystrophies and other muscle conditions. Next, he was appointed as an independent research fellow at the Royal Veterinary College in London. In 2013, Alberto rejoined the gene therapy laboratory at Royal Holloway as project manager to work on the optimization of gene therapies and antisense therapeutics for a number of muscle conditions. He collaborated on the development of gene therapy AAV vector for OPMD, and this vector is expected to enter the first in-human phase 1/2 clinical trial soon. In 2022, Alberto became lecturer in gene therapy and is currently leading the Gene Medicine Laboratory for Rare Diseases to develop new genetic treatments for muscular dystrophy and muscle conditions. Today, he will speak about gene therapy for OPMD and the development of the silence and replacement gene therapy application. Alberto, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea. So I will share my screen, I think, because otherwise I have some slides here. Okay, can you see them? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay, great. So are they in the slideshow system? Yeah. Can you see them clearly?
Not yet. We can see the whole PowerPoint still.
Maybe now?
Now, yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so yeah, so the presentation is about the gene therapy for this disease. This is because, of course, this is our main expertise in our laboratory. So is mainly a recap of what has been the gene therapy study so far. They started a few years ago, I would say probably 10 years ago, and when George Dixon was actually starting the initial program of gene therapy. So to understand properly what is the approach we are trying, it's good that we have a recap in what is actually what the problem is in OPMD. You perfectly know already that, but it's important so then we understand also the following points. So PAPIN1 is a very important protein. It does many things. It's involved in many biological pathways. And the problem is that there is this expansion of the GCG trinucleotide repeats in the first part of the gene. So at the beginning of the gene, you have that because the GCG trinucleotide repeat make an amino acid that is called alanine. Instead of having 10 alanines, 10 amino acids at the beginning of the protein, you have between 11 and 18. And that is a problem because this stretch of amino acids that makes this protein expanded, as it's called, actually make intranuclear inclusions, and these inclusions are resistant to degradation. These inclusions trap many other molecules that are important for the life of the cell. So it can be RNA, it can be proteins, it can be the normal proteins as well. So the problem is to get rid of this expanded version of the protein. In our laboratory, we have been working for many years with an animal model, which is called A17. It's called A17 because it has the expression of this expanded PAPIN1. So it makes in the muscle this protein that is mutated, and it is mutated presenting 17 alanines. So quite a very long stretch of alanines. And this makes the disease in the animal model. This is affected by oculopharyngeal muscular dystrophy. And you see it because skeletal muscle contain intranuclear inclusions. There is fibrosis, there is muscle atrophy, there is a lot of gene deregulation, and the muscle are weak. So the animal model is very good actually to study the disease. And what we do is gene therapy. So the idea, because of the particular genetic defect we have here, what you really want to do is to get rid of the expanded PAPIN1, so the protein that is mutated, the one that makes the problem, and at the same time express, so increase the production in the cells of something that is working, so a papillon that is working. So we have to do two things. And we do that with gene therapy. So the classic gene therapy is essentially to take a piece of DNA, putting into a cargo, which is, in our case, is a viral cargo, is a viral vector. And then we introduce this in the body through a local intramuscular injection. In this case, this is the classical gene therapy application. So you do that in order that the DNA then that you injected will express the protein you want. But in this case, we can't really do that. We can't do simply that. We have to inject two different systems, and we have done with two different vectors. So we put in a vector a particular stretch of DNA that decrease the amount of the expanded papillon, and we have put in another vector a stretch of DNA that increase the expression of a good papillon protein. And we have pretty much co-delivered, co-injected the two vectors together in this animal model by local intramuscular injection in a muscle called tibialis anterior. So doing that, this is just a data set that shows something called in situ muscle physiology, where you actually you measure the muscle strength, and you see that in A17 mice the muscle strength is very low compared to the FEB, which are the wild type, the mice that don't have the pathology. And if you inject the two vectors together, you normalize the muscle strength to the level of the wild type. And this is another set of data which is very complex actually to describe, but essentially this means that in the mouse model you have 452 genes, so proteins, let's say, that are present in less quantity than it should be, and 413 proteins that actually are present in higher amount than it should be when you have the disease. So with the injection of the two vectors together, you have that this is actually normalized, pretty much normalized to the level of the normal mouse, and with 98% of correction. So all these data were published in this paper back in, it was 2017. Working with two viral vectors would be pretty difficult, unsafe, difficult, costly, also for the biopharma. So we moved to a single vector, which is called dual vector. Is again delivered by an adeno-associated viral vector, which is our vector of choice. It's not just for us. I mean, at the moment, is the most used animal viral vector for gene therapy applications, at least when you have to inject directly an animal or a human as well. And in this case, we tested this vector, and we showed that this was working as when you inject the two vectors together. So the green dots you see here are the intranuclear inclusions present into the cells of the muscle. And in blue, we have the nuclei of the muscle, where the inclusions are. So in day 17, you see many of them. In the FEB, which is the wild type that doesn't have the pathology, there's pretty much nothing. And injecting the vectors, the two vectors together, or the new vector with everything packed together, again, there's a strong reduction in the presence of these aggregates. Then we started to collaborate with the Benitech Biopharma, which wanted to bring in clinic this approach. And we made together with this new vector, which is called Bb301. Bb stands for Benitech Biopharma, of course. 301 is the code they gave to the vector. This is slightly different. There's some modification in the system. The idea is that it will be much safer working by intramuscular injection. And again, here there's a huge set of data that we don't have to go in details. But what is nice here to see is that this is what is called dose response analysis. So you inject a different amount of the vector in the muscle, and you want to see if there is a response that correlates with the dose you injected. So you want to see low response if you inject not much of vector. You want to see a very nice response if you inject a high amount of the vector. And this is what we observed indeed, because injecting a small amount of vector, you see that the intranuclear inclusions are not much changed, while they are strongly reduced if you inject a lot of the vector. The same for the muscle weight. So the muscle weight, so the volume of the muscle is restored to the level of the wild type mouse if you inject a high dose of the vector. And the same is for the muscle strength. This is a diagram that shows essentially the same in situ muscle physiology analysis we have seen previously. And here at the top, you have the level of the wild type. And here you have at the bottom, you have the A17. So at the top, again, together with the wild type, you have the muscle injected with a high dose of the vector. So there is a nice correlation as well. And the same correlation, again, it is quite difficult to see, but what is nice again here is that these two are what you deliver with the vector. So you deliver a gene that's called optimized PAPIN1, and you deliver other fragments of RNA that are called SH-mirs. And again, what is nice is to see that if you inject not much of a small amount of the vector, you see nearly nothing. If you inject a lot of the vector, you see that actually this is well expressed. And the same is for the RNA that we are injecting. So there is a clear, nice dose response in the vector. And we published this as well recently. This was published last year. And this is actually the basis to start a proper clinical application there. So we demonstrated that gene therapy treatment in mouse and by local injection has a lot of beneficial effects in fibrosis, in intraocular inclusion, in muscle strength, in many other things. So Benitech Biopharma then decided to move forward. So they started a clinical trial in sheep, because it doesn't exist a large animal model for OPMD. So what you can do is to try to mimic the injection in a large animal. And sheep was initially identified as possible large animal were doing that. So there was a preparation of the for the clinical point of view for the injection itself. So trying to do injection in the pharyngeal area of sheep. And then they moved to a dose response injection in dogs using the beagle as an animal for the study. And I have to say that the dog experiment went pretty well. So they have now concluded this analysis. They showed by press release some very good data in dogs as well. And this is the last press release. This is published 2 weeks ago, where essentially they, Benitech Biopharma suggests that they are starting now the clinical trial. And at the beginning will be a 6-month natural history clinical trial to verify how is the pathology in the first patient that will be enrolled. They started with 1 at the moment. And after the 6 months, they will this patient will be injected in the cricopharyngeal muscle, which is the muscle of choice at least for this clinical trial. So this is good news. Of course, this is something that the company is doing and can do, because we in the lab we can't do that, of course. What we can do is to continue our research, and for us in particular, what I'm trying to do in my lab is to improve the vector, to improve the system, because I think that a local intramuscular injection is nice, is useful, but we should really try to go with the systemic administration of the vector, as it happens for other muscular dystrophies. And this requires changes in the construct, changes in the approach also, and we are working on that. We can maybe discuss more in details if you are interested to know more about that. But we really want to move to a systemic administration. And that's it. And thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Alberto. I'm very happy now to take any questions if there is any questions from the participants. We did have some questions in advance, so we can start with those. So there is, so obviously this is great news that this gene therapy is going to enter clinical trials. But there has been a question also asking if there's already something else that is another therapy that could be in clinical trials, or yeah, so are there any news essentially on that?
No, unfortunately, not that I know. There was the only really promising approach that have been developed recently is the use of anti-aggregation drugs. There was the trehalose that was proposed as possible treatment. There was a nice set of preclinical data available in animal models, and there was a company that decided to bring this forward, but then they had financial issues, and pretty much they couldn't really carry on with the clinical trial. There's nothing else that I know. So at the moment, the gene therapy is the only really potential treatment, apart from the surgery, of course. But yeah.
So then this is really exciting news, and congratulations. So the next question we had, so it's actually good that you finished with this about the systemic delivery. So there are people who they were wondering, so with these, so the research you carry out, can it be applicable to other muscular dystrophies? I mean, this is obviously very OPMD specific because it does target a specific gene, but can something similar then?
But yes, the idea is that this system, this is called actually silence and replace. And the reason is that with the silence, you want to downregulate, you want to decrease the amount of the protein that doesn't work, and at the same time you want to increase with the replace the amount of protein that works. This potentially can work for many other diseases. There's another disease on the high that is treated in the same way, again with a vector that has these two features. Because this approach is potentially working for any of the disease called gain of function. So when you have a mutation, this gain of function means that the gene that is mutated, that doesn't work, is not just simply doesn't work, so that you can replace its function with something better. It actually has a gain of function, so it gains a further function that is detrimental for the cell. And so it's not sufficient just to increase the amount of the normal gene, the normal protein. You can't just do that. You have also to reduce the amount of the bad protein that is there in the cell. So you can have the vector, which is this long stretch of DNA, where you have these two parts that are the parts that one makes a silence, one makes the replacement. Changing that, potentially you can try to treat other diseases, other gain of function diseases, which are based on the same concept. Yeah.
Thank you. And there's been a question now so there are a couple of questions actually from the audience. So can you, the first one is, I guess, yeah, so you did touch on this now. So the question is, can it be possible to switch off PAB-PM1 gene, and would that lead to recovery from muscle atrophy, or it does get a bit more complicated?
Is more complex, actually. We tried, I had to go very quickly with the data because 10 minutes you can't really chat too much, but one of the data I show you is that when you injected both vectors in a muscle, you have the muscle force is normalized to the level of the normal muscle, the wild type, the one that doesn't have the disease. We also injected, in the same graph is represented, the two vectors alone. So if you just do the expression of optimized papilloma, if you just replace the protein, you don't do much. You don't do nearly anything, actually. If you simply downregulate the papillon-1 you have there, again, you actually make the muscle worse. The real problem here is that, and this is probably the suggestion of the person that made the question, is if it is possible to downregulate specifically the expanded PAPIAN-1, because in the cell we'll have around 50% of the mutated and 50% of the normal. And what makes the disease is the 50% that is mutated. Unfortunately, due to the type of mutation, which is an expansion, a repeat expansion, we can't do that. So the only thing we can do is to downregulate all of it. So get rid of all the mutated version, and then on top, make some new one that works.
Thank you. The next one, could you expand how the systemic distribution issues could be managed in the future?
That's a good question. What we know is from other muscular dystrophies that are treated by gene replacement. There's a Duchenne muscular dystrophy gene therapy application already in clinical trial, in 4 clinical trials at the moment. We have other muscular dystrophies as well in clinical trial, gene therapy for these particular diseases, and all of them are based on systemic administration. So what we know is what we can do is to pick information from these clinical trials. All of them are based on using adeno-associated viral vector, which is the vector of choice, also for the vector that we are using here. We can pick the same serotype, which is the subtype specific for that viral vector. And we can work using the same doses of the vector, same volume injected, try to manage the side effects on the same way, because there will be a possibly immunoresponse towards the viral vectors. There may be possibly immunoresponse against the transgene, potentially. So there are different points we can take from previous clinical trials. There's already a nice set of data available. And so I'm sure that for the future clinical trial by systemic injection for other muscular dystrophies, the route will be easier than for the first that started.
Thank you. The next question is, do you know if the clinical trial will they be taking applications in the UK as well?
At the moment, I know they are working mainly in US, in Canada, because there's many people affected there, but also France. I don't know in terms of UK, but I think that is a possibility. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And we have another one. Is it important at which stage of the disease? So is it important the stage of the disease when deciding on the dose of the therapy?
I don't think so, because of course the earlier the better. I mean, you want really to go as early as possible. But I have to say that the pharyngeal muscle in particular is already very fibrotic at the beginning, and this fibrotic also in normal people. People that don't have the disease, or people that have not much the disease. So it doesn't really matter. I don't think it matters much. I think that the good thing is that it can potentially, everyone can potentially be treated at the same way. And it's difficult to know now if there will be an effect or not. Also because we still don't know much about the cause of the disease. We know that PAPIAN-1, this protein, is involved. We know why, but we don't know a lot. We don't know a lot about the aggregates, for example. So what aggregates are, what they have, why they are there. We even don't know if they are there from the beginning, from where an individual is born, or actually they are there at the end specifically because of the disease, because they even could be a protected way for the cells to avoid that actually this expanded PAPIAN-1 moves around, so they tend to trap this. So there's still a lot of things we don't know. So it's difficult to say. I think that we'll have to see the clinical trial what says.
Thank you. And there is so the follow-up question to this one is this therapy age restricted? Is it a good idea to those children? And if is it good to start before the symptoms onset?
I think this is a question for a clinician, I think. As I said, I think that the earliest the better. But of course, if you don't have symptoms, you don't have the pathology. So I think it's more for the clinician to answer that. I think that I would say probably yes, but yeah, it's just my opinion. I mean, I might be wrong. And the thing is that of course there are no children affected by the disease. This is a mature. This is for people with a certain age. So yeah, but of course there are individuals that have the pathology and they don't know, or they know, but still they don't show the effects. So yeah, it's a very good question. But it's more for the clinician. Yeah.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, and I don't see any in the Q&A, I would like to thank you for your great talk today, Alberto. Thank you so much.
Thank you
for your time. And I'm handing back over to Nero for the next part of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Alberto. So many thanks to Andrea and Dr. Malerba. I'm pleased to welcome some more panelists to join us to discuss living with OPMD. After I've introduced them, I'll invite each of them to say a few words about their experience of OPMD and the support that they provide before moving into questions and discussions. And Dr. Lilleker, I might bring that question to you that we just had as one of the first questions. So just a reminder, keep using the Q&A function to submit questions. We'll be happy to take as many as we can. And so let's begin. So Dr. James Lilleker is a neurology consultant and honorary senior lecturer at the Manchester Centre for Clinical Neuroscience, Salford. He's particularly interested in the evaluation with patients with complex neuromuscular syndromes, working as a co-lead of the muscle disease unit at Salford and leading the Regional SMA Assessment and Treatment Centre. James has completed a PhD in inflammatory muscle disease and continues to participate in clinical trial and biomarker research. Next, I'd like to introduce Taher Dhuliawala, is a physiotherapist and a clinical service manager at the Muscular Dystrophy Support Centre, which offers specialist physical therapies and support to people in the UK living with neuromuscular conditions. Taher graduated in physiotherapy from Pune University, India in 2009 and was awarded a Master's in Applied Physiotherapy, Neurology at Sheffield Hallam University in 2012. He worked as a locum physiotherapist in a number of NHS trusts before entering private practice and become clinical service manager at the Muscular Dystrophy Support Centre in 2021, having first joined the team in 2018. Taher leads online as well as face-to-face groups therapy classes. And alongside clinical management, he also provides holistic management for his neurological patients. We're also pleased to be joined by Jodi Allen. Jodi is a senior speech and language therapist at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery. She specialises in the diagnosis and management of swallowing and motor speech disorders in patients living with neurological and neuromuscular conditions. Jodi is part funded by the National Institute of Health Research, where she's currently undertaking research relating to swallowing difficulties in neuromuscular disease. I'm also pleased to be joined by Sarah Dunbar-Baker, She's a clinical lead occupational therapist working for Dudley Rehabilitation Centre within the Dudley Borough in the West Midlands. She qualified in 1995 and gained experience working at Sanderwell General Hospital on a rotational position before moving to Huntley Kinetics to work as a specialist equipment OT in the borough of Walsall. She had a stint at the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital in Birmingham before beginning work within the community setting in Dudley in 2000. And then finally, I'm very pleased to be joined by Brian Gould, who was diagnosed with OPMD at the age of 46. He is 63 later this month by a geneticist blood test following his sister's diagnosis the year before. At the age of 55, numerous members of his family have the condition. OPMD started to impact his mobility and swallowing approximately 10 years ago. Brian's wife saved his life in October 2016 when she carried out an abdominal thrust. Brian had eyelids elevator advanced surgery several years ago, and in mid-January of this year, sling surgery to correct droopy eyelids. Between October 16 and October 17, Brian walked a 500-mile fundraiser for MD UK, averaging 1.37 miles a day. Today, he can only walk a few meters with a rollator indoors and relies predominantly on his power wheelchair, both inside and outside his home. Brian is a peer support volunteer at MD UK, a campaigner for better access to coordinated care, physiotherapy, both physical and respiratory, and for the right to breathe, and for routine commissioned access to cough assist devices. He's spoken at numerous conferences and educational events to raise the profile and knowledge of muscular dystrophies, supported by NHS England Leadership Programme. Been part of the Department of Health ministerial meetings, and he is lay co-chair of the West Midlands Neuromuscular Clinical Network. So that's all the introductions. I'd like to come to you now, Dr. Lilleker. Could you talk us through the different elements of care that the team around you as a consultant might provide to somebody living with OPMD? And I wonder if you could also tackle our first question, which is what joint up thinking, sharing information and general communication is there between different departments, hospitals dealing with the same patient to address the same issue? So over to you, Dr. Lilleker.
Hi, and yeah, thank you, Nero, for that introduction. So yeah, I work at Salford Royal. It's now the hospital is now called the Northern Care Alliance, which sounds slightly strange, but that's what we've been renamed to recently. And we have a muscle diseases unit here. I work with Professor Mark Roberts, and we cover the area of Greater Manchester as a population of about 3 million or so. We're a small but growing team. A couple of consultants, a couple of physiotherapists, a nurse specialist and care advisor, and an orthotist, and we do specialist neuromuscular clinics, as well as some bespoke clinics for some of our other services. So for SMA as one of the recent examples. In terms of OPMD, I've worked quite closely with ophthalmology colleagues in Bolton and at the Eye Hospital in central Manchester, which is where several of the patients I've diagnosed with OPMD have come from. And listening to Brian's story there, I think that really is an important issue, is the late diagnosis of OPMD, often after several interventions by ophthalmologists or others. And before, if you like, the penny drops. And I guess that's one really important issue, is about raising awareness of this condition. And I think Nira, you make a really important point about joined up care. This is quite difficult for rare diseases where people are often seen in different hospitals. So we cover Greater Manchester, and some patients coming from much further afield, actually Cumbria and North Wales and Staffordshire, and communicating with hospitals, the experts in those hospitals can be pretty difficult, and doesn't always go to plan, to be perfectly honest with you. I think there is an issue there that that could do with some work and some joined up thinking. I think coming on to that question at the end of the fantastic talk from Alberto, I've got several patients with genetically confirmed OPMD, but without any symptoms at all. And I think there's several issues there. I think some patients probably do have subtle involvement that's just not manifesting in symptoms yet. So one question is how hard we should go looking for problems, say subtle problems with swallowing or subtle eyelid opening weakness or eye movement disorders. And another issue which was raised is just we don't necessarily know enough about the natural history of this disease. So if you have the genetic change, what are your chances of actually developing the syndrome of OPMD? And if so, at what age and how severely will you be affected? I think in some other disorders, so Huntington's disease comes to mind. I think they're much further along that path now of a very tight correlation between some genetic findings and when that disease may affect you and how severely. But in OPMD, I don't think we're really there yet. So there does have to be that balance between starting any treatment as soon as possible. And I agree that should be the default position, because once muscle is completely fibrosed, it's very difficult to see a pathway to improvement. But also making sure that, if you like, we're not over treating people that won't necessarily become significantly symptomatic from their condition. It's a really interesting issue and a vexing issue that we'll be facing for years to come as genetic therapies gradually come online for conditions like OPMD.
Thank you, James. Just before we move on to the other speakers, we did have a question, and you've mentioned something about the natural history of the condition. So a question that, if we can just address now, that had come in advance was, do we now have an OPMD patient registry? And do you feel that having a worldwide OPMD patient registry is important to OPMD?
I think it's a good question. I don't actually know the answer to that. I'm not part of an OPMD registry. It strikes me that there probably is one, but given the fact that I don't particularly know about it, perhaps it's not being used as widely as it should be. I mean, I think registries are generally useful. And if you're thinking about some of the other diseases I'm involved in, like SMA, for example, where there's a really kind of fantastic patient registry and also a sort of clinician-focused registry, it really has helped understand the natural history of that disease quite remarkably. Yeah, I suspect there is a registry, but I suspect it's potentially slightly underused. And yeah, perhaps that's something I'll have to look into. Thank
you. I think it's probably something that MD UK can look into as well, just to do a bit of research and see what's out there and see if it's something that we can push forward. So no, definitely a good idea. So if we can now move on to some of our other panelists. So I'd like to now come to Taher. So we'd love to hear a few words about the Muscular Dystrophy Support Centre, and then perhaps you can give us an overview of the kind of physiotherapy support that might be provided with somebody with OPMD. And I wonder if, as part of that, you could tackle another one of our advanced questions: what is appropriate exercise and what's too much?
Sure. Thank you, Nuru, for the introduction. And my name is Taher. I'm one of the clinical services manager at the charity and also physiotherapist. So just a little bit about our charity. We are based at our main hub is in Coventry, and it's our 10th anniversary this year. So we've been established for 10 years now. And we do have a few satellite locations where we the aim was, and the vision of the charity was, to see people closer to their home. And as part of that, we have established 3 satellite clinics for now, one in Birmingham, then one in Leicester in the East Midlands, and one in the Black Country in Tipton. So we have around 550-ish patients on our casebook who have got muscular dystrophy or some kind of neuromuscular condition that we see. We have around, none of our staff are full-time, so everyone we have is part-time, and we've got some employed physios and some self-employed associate physios. So our team consists of 9 physios, 2 osteos, and 1 complementary therapist who work at different locations. And the type of therapy what we provide is either face-to-face therapy, where patients, they are service users, we call them, they come to our center or the satellite clinic, and we provide them therapy, or it could be as part of online classes where they join one of our booked classes or one of the drop-in classes, and we run a number of classes over the whole week, and even we starting to run something on a weekend, and along with that we just have some, we are starting some social events, just some educational events, some fun-based activities, some coffee mornings and stuff like that. So yeah, this is all the supports and therapy provision we provide for our service users. And in terms of OPMD as such, we don't have those many patients with OPMD. Unfortunately, I think we have got a few patients with OPMD, probably a handful. And I think one of the reasons, as Dr. Lilleker mentioned, is probably because, you know, many people don't have that manifestation. So they probably come to us when things starts to present more, and they need support. So that is probably one of the things. I think Brian is one of our service users. He's been coming for such a long time. And so we get a referral from either a GP consultant or a neuromuscular care advisors or one of the specialist physios, OTs, speech and language therapists, and we accept that. Once we receive that referral, we do an initial assessment, which is quite extensive. We do a lot of outcome measures. We do a very in-depth initial assessment where we look at your problems, your goals, what all things you can manage, check your muscle strength, check your range of motion, and what other problems you have. And depending on that, we create a exercise program for you. And also we lay down our recommendations of what actually the therapy would consist, or how much therapy you should do. So I think answering your question about the dosage of the therapy, it really depends on what problem someone, you know, patient with OPMD has. So initially, you know, they might have problems around the swallowing and, you know, the muscles of the eyes around that side, but some people can present with some problem around the either shoulder or the hip and pelvic area. So depending on that, we would recommend them exercises. We actually, one of the difference what we have, which sometimes is with, you know, other our counterparts, is that we do a lot of hands-on therapy. So and that is actually one of the main difference which most of the service users find beneficial, is we work on a lot of soft tissue work, we do a lot of stretching work, a lot of hands-on therapy to kind of try and minimize as much as stiffness and as much as pain as possible, because most of our patients who come to us, pain and stiffness is one of the major problems. And they have got a different kind of a movement pattern. So we try to, obviously we know once the muscle wasting has established, it's very difficult to change that pattern. But what we try to do is we try to minimize as much damage, you know, or as much complication, which will happen probably in future, as much as possible. And this is what we suggest is we create a home exercise program as well for some people, or we advise them to join, along with having face-to-face therapy, advise them to join our online classes as part of their self-management program. So we would provide them with some exercises as well. We usually suggest probably, you know, low to moderate amount of activity. We also suggest doing some cardio-based activity like going on a bike, for upper body or lower body. We do have a lot of equipment, and we are planning to get a lot of equipment in our main center in Coventry to help and support our service users and patients. So yes, that's a little bit about us. I hope I answered the question, but if there's anything more, please do not hesitate to ask.
Thank you, Taher. I think we will have some more questions later on, as we've already got some in advance, and I can see some on the live Q&A. So thank you, that's answered particularly well. So can we now move on to Jodi? And Jodi, just could you give us an overview of the kind of support that a speech and language therapist might provide to people with OPMD? And we've had some questions in advance about support with exercises that might help swallowing, particularly asking about shaker exercise to aid swallowing. So if I can hand over to you, Jodi.
You sure can, thank you. I've been on one of these panels before actually, and I have spent a little bit of time explaining that speech and language therapists, our titles are a little bit misleading, because actually when we're working with people with muscle conditions, often we're working with swallowing disorders, and it would be the speech and language therapist that would support and advise patients with swallowing related difficulties as well as speech related issues. So for our patients living with OPMD, they can, as you've already heard today, predominantly have the pharyngeal or the throat muscles are affected. So we don't see everybody with muscle conditions, but we do see most people living with oculopharyngeal muscular dystrophy. Because it interferes with swallowing. And of course, swallowing is a really important part of our day, swallowing saliva, swallowing food, swallowing drinks, eating and drinking a Christmas dinner. And social eating is a massive part of most people's days. And actually that combination of socializing and eating and having a meal is actually really challenging for somebody with OPMD. And we heard about Brian having to have the Heimlich manoeuvre to dislodge, I assume, Brian, something from your throat. So what we try to do as speech and language therapists is, first of all, educate our patients living with OPMD to try and help them understand swallowing and the sorts of issues that arise when you've got a muscle condition like OPMD. We think about the clinical risks. So when swallowing goes wrong, the risks are choking, so airway obstruction, but also things going down the wrong way, not blocking the airway, but causing infections on the lungs. So they're the clinical risks. But actually a lot of my patients with OPMD struggle too with getting enough calories in as the disease progresses, and the swallowing may become more affected, and trying to get enough calories in to keep the rest of the bodily systems working is really tricky. So trying to juggle all of those three things, but also the quality of life and the joy and the pleasure of eating and drinking and being surrounded by your family and friends at meal times are other things that we have to try and juggle and piece together. And it's very much a process of we have to navigate as the disease changes. So I know you had a question about how do you something about getting to the appointments when they're few and far between. One of the things that we do certainly with our patients with muscle disease is we think about our patients self-advocating and self-managing. So we look at what's happening now and we talk about what might happen in the future and what might be the red flag signals that the disease is changing, so that our patients can contact us rather than wait for maybe an appointment in 6 months or 12 months. And help our patients to navigate those changes in the disease as they arise, rather than wait for a health professional to kind of come each time to help them out. So yes, that's the main part of what we do with people with swallowing problems and OPMD. People also have changes with their speech because the muscles that we use for swallowing are also involved in speech, and their speech can become indistinct or a little bit more challenging to hear in a crowded room, in a social situation. So we have to navigate again, how you can still remain clear, intelligible in all of those situations that you might find yourself in. And it might be that some of our patients are still working, some might be teachers and they have to present. So they're the two main things that we would be looking at as speech and language therapists.
Thank you, Jodi. That's really helpful. We have got a couple more questions for you, but we'll come to that later once I've been through the rest of the panelists. Sarah, can we come to you next? So Sarah, could you talk us through why an OT is so important to people living with OPMD and some of the support that you provide? We've also had a relevant question in advance as well about general condition management in between tests and specialist appointments, and wondered if this was something you felt was under your rehabilitation remit.
Thank you for the introduction, Neeru. Thank you for inviting me to talk about the role of occupational therapy with you today. I will give you a brief overview about what occupational therapy is, as a lot of people really don't understand what our job entails. Everybody sort of understands what a physiotherapist does, but coming to occupational therapy is slightly different. So OT is a client-centred health profession that promotes the health and well-being through occupation. And this is through practical and purposeful activities that allow people to live as independently as possible. The primary role of occupational therapy is to enable people to participate in the activities of everyday life, which includes your day-to-day tasks such as self-care, work and leisure. Thinking about the tasks that you've already carried out today, this is what we look at. So it's looking at sort of getting in and out of bed, washing and dressing, getting on and off the toilet, doing the stairs, making drinks, making meals, and looking also at mobility as well. So there is that slight crossover that we do have with physiotherapy. And those are just to mention a few of the activities that we look at. So OTs work with people and communities to enhance their ability to engage in the occupations that they want to do by modifying the activity or environment to better support that individual. So we're looking holistically at an individual, and within our job title, we talk about our patients. So we look at them as a whole, both physically and their mental health as well. So this is done by providing practical support to increase or maintain independence, by empowering that individual to achieve their full potential, especially focusing on their activities of daily living. So the OT's role is to support and work with the individual to overcome the effects of decreased function and to assist with a renewed sense of purpose and to regain their roles that they may have changed due to a deterioration in their condition. So we do try to look at what a patient is actually able to do or what they want to be able to do rather than what they can't do. So rather than looking on the negative side of the difficulties that some people will say, I can't do this and I can't do that, it's looking at what can they actually do or how can we get them to their end goal. So we'll always focus on the individual strengths and their goals and what they want to achieve. It's not what I want them to achieve, it's what they want to achieve. And I feel that building up a good rapport between the therapist and the individual is key to a beneficial and productive working relationship. So it's always being at the end of the phone, especially in the community. We don't necessarily book appointments in 6 months, 12 months. After a course of therapy intervention, we do sort of discharge our patients, but they are able to then contact us if their condition changes and they need further input. So we're always at the other end of the phone to answer any questions or arrange appointments to go back out to see them at home. So I work within the neurology pathway within Dudley Rehab Service. So I see the whole array of different conditions from neurology patients. And the referrals that I have are received from other healthcare professionals, consultants, GPs, other occupational therapists and physios within the acute setting, other members of our MDT, so our multidisciplinary team. We have physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, specialist nurses, psychologists, dietitians, speech and language therapists and case managers. So we are a very good team within the Dudley Rehab Service. So we can also refer into and out of, you know, the different therapies and services. And we do have a meeting every week. So if we're concerned about any of our patients, we can then refer on to other services straight away. I enjoy working within the community setting, assessing the patients within their own homes, as I find that beneficial due to finding a clearer picture of how individuals live and working together to develop a realistic and achievable goals. Because I think I have worked in a clinic setting as well, but actually seeing somebody in their own property is very reassuring and puts people at ease, and you can actually see what they can manage and see what they want to be able to do. So when I go out to see somebody, I carry out a full initial assessment. So you look at their past medical history, medication, look at accessing the property, transfers, mobility, washing and dressing. And even though I'm a rehabilitation occupational therapist, so looking at exercise programs, we also deal with looking at small items of equipment and referring on for adaptations as and when required. We can also refer on to orthotics and to the wheelchair service, just so we can identify what goals our patients want to achieve and how we can get them to their end goal. So looking at what specialist assessments I carry out, so looking at transfers, so how do people get on and off their bed, their toilet, their chair. If they're struggling with those transfers, then we look at providing either different techniques or looking at some specialist equipment. For example, for the toilet, we can look at raised toilet seats, toilet frames, and even more specialist toileting equipment, knowing that a flat rise toilet, electrical toilet equipment is very beneficial to some people. So looking at flat rise rather than rise and recline facilities for some pieces of equipment. Regarding beds, we can provide bed levers, Wendy-let sheets, which are specialist slip sheets to enable transfers to be made a little bit more easily, and also refer people for profiling beds as and when required. Looking at riser recliner chairs, specialist flat rise chairs, which makes the difference to enable somebody to independently transfer off a chair without needing further support from a family member. So where we look at postural support and pressure relief as well. We can also look at hoisting, so look at return standing aids, active hoist, which is standing hoist, and then moving on to mobile hoist or ceiling track hoist as and when required. We can also provide mobility aids, so looking at what's necessity at that time. And also when we're carrying out our assessments, you might provide one piece of equipment at the start of the treatment plan, but then as time progresses and the condition changes, we might need to change that type of equipment. So we're continually looking at risk assessments and assessments of that patient and their abilities of what they can and can't do. And also we look at wet rooms, looking at the ability for showering to make sure people are able to maintain their personal hygiene. So I can refer on through our home improvements for wet rooms, and they can be done within 6 to 12 months. But if people can't wait that amount of time and want to fund it privately, I do assist with looking at position of the shower, the toilet, any rails that need to be fitted, and also providing showering equipment, so shower chairs. So whilst assessing the patient, we can identify ways to support the individual through the progression of their condition, looking at providing support as and when required, but it's also making sure that that person is ready for that support, because everybody is an individual and people may not be ready to contend with the changes in their bodies. So it's looking at any further support from psychology that might be needed, or sort of planting the seed for equipment to say that in the long term this is what you may need, but you know you don't want it at the moment, but we can look at that and have those discussions, and they can be quite difficult discussions at the time, but it's having that time to spend with that patient. Because also if you are requiring specialist equipment, it doesn't come quickly, because you wouldn't maybe need the rep out from the company and then the paperwork and then the funding to purchase that item of equipment through social services. So it's having those conversations and building that rapport with our patients to make sure all their needs are discussed, and at a pace that they're happy for it to be carried out. And finally, it's just looking at not only supporting our patients, but also supporting their family as well, because without the family members, you know, more support from the community, social services or the NHS would be required. So we are grateful to all family members for supporting, you know, their loved ones. So that's just a little bit about what I do for my patients. So could you just repeat the question that...
Let me just go back to the question. Just give me a second. You may have actually answered it, to be fair.
Okay.
Let's have a quick look at the question. Yeah, so the first bit of it was about why OT is so important. So you've answered that particularly well. And then the actual advanced question was about general condition management in between tests, specialist appointments. I think you've answered that as well in terms of having access to your service and having local access to OT, because not each area will have a fantastic rehabilitation centre where you're based. So that's great. And I think you've definitely answered those questions. So thank you. I'd just like to add to that, we do have an OT network. So we work with OTs across the UK, as we do with physiotherapists. And I think we've started a speech and language one as well, but there are fewer speech and language therapists that work with neuromuscular conditions. So if any participants are looking for an OT within their area, we may be able to signpost across if you do get in touch with us. So thank you, Sarah. And then I'd finally like to move on to Brian. Brian, it would be really great to hear from you about any of your reflections you might have on what you've heard so far based on your experiences. And also, given your active role across a number of fronts, raising awareness for OPMD and other conditions and advocating for better support and services, where you'd like to first, so you could have a stab at this first advanced question. What can those of us who have the condition and who might be willing do to help spread the word? So yeah, just your reflections first, and then I can repeat the question if need be. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for a wonderful event. I think I'll pick up on James, the consultant, first and foremost. He did make reference to the range of services and the coordination and those services, I guess, from my interpretation, what he said, how they come together and how they liaise with one another. That's absolutely crucial. I dip into the whole gambit of services. I speech and language, dietitian, respiratory, care advisors, OT, physio, ophthalmology, you name it, I've been there, I've got the t-shirt. And I see from one of the questions online at the moment is about the progression of the condition. And does it all progress at the same speed? No, it doesn't. My first symptoms were one of slurred speech and some swallowing difficulties. That was very evident before I was diagnosed. Then I had droopy eyelid issues, and it was only somewhere down the line that my muscular dystrophy, my OPMD, manifests itself with mobility issues, which have progressed at what appears to be a fast pace, but it's just the subtle changes in muscle strength that have tipped me over the edge on a number of occasions. I think it is important to get to know the professionals that you're likely to need their support thereof. Get to know about your condition. Lived experience and your knowledge is absolutely crucial to how you can then, if you like, get the best out of the clinicians and support services that are there to help. I dip into and have wonderful support and physiotherapies from Muscular Dystrophy Support Centre, which of course is up to here, as explained. I dip into and have the wonderful support of community services, neuro rehab, and Sarah is my OT. And it's just a wonderful to be able to have access to those specialists whose knowledge and expertise and care for the individual is so very much needed. So in my case, has been wonderful. It's joined up services. It's those professionals talking to one another. It's my neurologist, a specialist in neuromuscular conditions, and my care advisor, liaising with my respiratory consultant and my ophthalmologist. So it's really making sure that everybody's talking to one another, and I think it's important that the individual is at the centre of that and is always asking questions and always asking, who can help me with this? Who can help me with that? Do you need to be talking to that person, etc., etc. I would say that those with OPMD travel this journey at different rates and speeds. I know of people in their 70s who are still walking the highlands of Scotland with very little mobility issues. I'm at the other end of the scale now, and I'm in a wheelchair. But that's not to say you cannot have a good life living with OPMD. I think you have to challenge yourself, and you have to be accepting of the support that's out there from those individuals. And going back to Sarah, Sarah's come to my home many, many times. She's helped through social services to provide me with a profile bed, a riser chair, a riser toilet, different aids around the home and advice. And it's just so that I can lead as an independent life as possible. So I would say, for those with OPMD and wondering about the future, don't be too alarmed. It comes at you at a different pace and different rate, but do exercise as much as you can. Dip into the local neuro rehab services, and if you have the good fortune, also dip into the services of a charity like the Muscular Dystrophy Support Centre, who can give you hands-on muscle physiotherapist. I guess that's my take on living with OPMD and muscular dystrophy. And remind me again what the question was?
The question, you've sort of talked about it already. It was about spreading the word about OPMD, so more people understand it and recognise the condition.
I think if you can, and if you feel confident enough to put yourself out there to explain to healthcare professionals about the condition and about the needs of increased services, then please do so. I'm quite confident speaking in conferences and at education events. I spoke to 90 odd GPs in Dudley several years ago about OPMD, a GP education event. I realised quite early on that my sister's care was poorly coordinated and she never had access to a cough assist machine. So I took it on myself to raise the profile and the need of cough assist devices, and had the good fortune then, supported by MD UK, to speak in Westminster on several occasions and to raise the profile of the need for prophylaxis. And as a campaigner, I think it's always somebody that's really keen to see that we are supported effectively. I think whatever you can, in whatever way, shape or form, if you can talk to those professionals about, well, why are you saying this is the level of service I need when I know differently? Challenge all the time, but challenge positively and get to look to engage with those that influence healthcare and provide services, and see it from their standpoint, but then turn it on its head and ask that they see it from your standpoint and look to collaborate with you to raise the profile and improve services.
Thank you, Brian, for sharing those thoughts, and also for sharing the positive aspect and having such a positive outlook and a very can-do attitude towards this is the access you need, this is how you can gain access to those things, because there are so many people involved in the care of people with OPMD, the multidisciplinary team. Not everyone knows about who should be involved and at what stage. So no, that's been really helpful and interesting, Brian. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to some questions. We do have an awful lot of questions to get through, so I'll see how much time we've got, and then, like I say, we will maybe come to the panelists after the event just to get some more questions answered, and we can send them out after today. So I think one of the first questions, and it was an advanced question, possibly for you, Dr. Lilleker, what are your thoughts on the use of keratin as a supplement? So we get asked quite a lot of questions on various conditions about supplements. I'm opening it up to you, James, but I don't know whether anyone else can answer as well.
Keratin, not creatine.
Well, creatine, sorry.
Oh, creatine. Okay, so
yeah. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Because these things do come up as sort of supplement that someone's read about online, and there is a sort of interesting interface between kind of nutritionists and dietitians, and then obviously the sort of medical sort of establishment, and not all necessarily agreeing with each other on what the sort of right advice is. I think with creatine, there is a sort of the evidence base is not good quality. There's a lack of well-controlled studies. In a sense of a study where you'd give some people creatine and others some kind of placebo. On top of that, there's often the studies that you do look at, they include a whole mix of different conditions. So it'll just say muscular dystrophy is kind of not otherwise specified, and everyone will be kind of grouped in together. But nevertheless, there was an attempt by Cochrane. So this is a sort of independent body that tries to synthesize the body of evidence and see if an intervention is useful or not. And they did suggest that creatine supplementation is a helpful intervention in people with muscle wasting conditions. So what I tend to suggest to patients is a sort of, I guess, a pragmatic viewpoint, really. A key thing is having a healthy diet in general terms, and obviously that means just including enough of the major food groups, including protein. And I think if natural sources of protein are probably the easiest way to consume enough protein. But on top of that, and especially if there are concerns about dietary intake, then a creatine supplement as a type you might buy in your local chemist, taken according to the instructions on the pack, is probably not going to do any harm, and it may help with your condition. I can see one of the questions on the Q&A is do dietary interventions mitigate the effects of OPMD? I mean, I think that the short answer is no. But I think there's potentially a role for slowing conditions down in terms of the rate of deterioration, slowing muscle wasting conditions down. And in combination with exercise, we know that people with muscle wasting conditions can get stronger. There is often this sort of concern that there is, potentially no route back once muscle strength is lost, but that's not always the case. It can be difficult for a condition like OPMD, where the muscles involved are often difficult to sort of specifically exercise, although I've got several patients with, say, foot drop, for example, where certain types of exercise could be useful there. What you'd often find is that there's a lot of kind of redundancy in the way that our muscle groups are set up. So a certain muscle might be affected, but another muscle that does the same type of movement or a sort of nearby movement can be kind of lent on to do a bit more and kind of compensate for some of that weakness. So I think exercise should be encouraged in combination with a healthy diet. And yeah, I'm quite pragmatic about creatine and protein supplements in general. I'm certainly not someone that says don't take that. I think it's pretty low risk intervention, and it may help in some ways. And I think this does touch on one of the questions about, can exercise be dangerous? And I think the answer to that is no. People worry a lot about this, and in the olden days, not that long ago, in fact, people with various muscle wasting conditions, they were just told, well, you're just going to have to stay in bed, because if you do anything, it's just going to make it worse. And I think that's categorically the wrong thing to do. Like anything, exercise has to be done safely. It's just like anything else. You wouldn't go from doing nothing to hitting it really hard in the gym, or suddenly running a marathon. You'd take it gradually, and if that can be done in combination with either a physiotherapist or some personal trainers know a little bit about muscle wasting conditions. If someone to give you a bit of advice about, especially if you've been inactive for a period of time, how you can just gently ease your way into it. And then as a physiotherapist can be really helpful on some more focused muscle conditioning, muscle strengthening exercises for particular muscle groups that can be problematic. So I think the summary of my ramblings now are that diet and exercise are important. I don't think they're not the whole answer to OPMD or other muscular dystrophies, but I think they're really important interventions that we can all do to try and mitigate some of the effects of the condition.
Thank you, James. I think you've covered quite a few of the questions that came in on diet, exercise, and preserving muscles, etc. I wonder if any of the other panelists have got anything to add to some of these areas in terms of comments.
Yeah, I think as Dr. Lilleker mentioned, about exercises, I would like to add just a couple of things. Is yes, as he mentioned, definitely not heavy exercise, or probably I have had some patients, who came to us in the for therapy, and they were diagnosed quite early on, not with OPMD, but with other patients with muscular dystrophy. And they said, oh, we were diagnosed quite early on. They were teens, and they just, wanted to go to the gym and hit hard, and that really didn't go well. So when they came to us, we kind of changed the whole exercise program. They can still go to gym, but it's all depends on what level of activities you do in the gym. Research does suggest like light to moderate level of activities is really helpful, weights wise, but also if you do like to do some cardio based activities, again, light to moderate level of activities really, really helpful. And I think when patients or they come to us, we do help them create a plan. And I think someone did ask about sports. Yesterday, I went to see one of my patients with like a different type of muscular dystrophy play wheelchair basketball, and actually he enjoys it, and I think he likes it. So we do work on that. He comes to us before his therapy, and I saw him on Saturday, and we worked on certain things, and it was really good. So people can do that, but as long as it's in a very safe way. and probably, I think, you know, just talking to your physiotherapist about it, and, you know, just working towards that. One of the things we do is maintain the condition, you know, maintaining it as long as possible, and, you know, preventing the you know, the progression of the condition for as long as possible. And that's why we work on a lot of things. Some of the things are, along with strength and conditioning and cardio, is also about balance and keeping up with someone's walking. So advising them on right sort of equipment, what they can have to walk with. People mostly struggle with standing up and stuff like that. So, you know, helping with that. And I think one of the things we don't do at the moment is collaborating with the community occupational therapist in kind of understanding on what equipment they can have, so that we can accordingly train our patients with that. So that's something we would like to work on in the future. So yeah.
Can I just add that as OTs, we look at pacing of the activities. So it's looking at maybe not overdoing your exercises, so therefore you're finding your transfers a little bit more difficult, or it might be that instead of walking a longer distance, you walk a shorter distance and then use a wheelchair, so that you're not overtiring those muscle groups. So pacing activities is quite paramount for our therapy sessions as well, because you know, we all think that we can do a lot more, or want to be able to do a lot more than our body's allowing us to do. So it's working in conjunction with the physiotherapist and knowing about the amount of exercise that you can do, but also having pacing that activity to enable you to do your activities of daily living safely.
Thank you, Sarah and Taher. Jodi, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add a little bit on swallowing related exercises. I know there was a question about the shaker or the shakir, depending on who you are, you pronounce it differently. Similar principles, really. There's no research evidence in OPMD that swallowing exercises work or don't work. But there is evidence in other conditions that exercise therapies for strength and swallowing do help to maintain eating and drinking for longer. So we can use the principles of those research studies and think about applying them to patients with oculopharyngeal muscular dystrophy. But we have to have those conversations with individual patients. We don't just give out exercises to everybody who comes along. We try and tailor. And I think one of the things that we do, because the evidence base isn't there yet, is that every time we introduce an exercise for swallowing, we always reevaluate it at 6 to 8 weeks or a certain time, so that then the speech therapist and the patient can then have a sensible conversation about whether they're actually doing something or whether they're actually burdensome. So I think there's always this conversation about benefit and burden when it comes to exercise, and sometimes they can be more burdensome from a swallowing perspective than they can be of benefit. Certainly with things like the shakir, which is a bit of an interesting exercise anyway, because you have to lie flat. Whoever it was who's asking it, you have to lie flat on the floor, and you bring your chin up to your chest. So you're not actually doing any swallowing, you're just strengthening one aspect of swallowing. But in OPMD, a whole host of muscles are affected, and you're only targeting one or two in that particular exercise. But like I say, we evaluate, we don't not give exercises out, but we also are mindful that the best swallowing you can do is eating and drinking, and you don't want to exercise your swallowing so much that you then can't manage your meal, because you need all those calories in for your muscles and your activity as well.
Thank you, Jodi. That's really, really helpful, and going back to basics about just everyday swallowing is really interesting as well. So we've got a couple of other questions relating to diet, etc. So I'm wondering if, Jodi, I come to you again. We had a question about weight loss. I'm not sure it's completely your area as a speech and language therapist, but we had a question very early on from Gary, who's currently planning to lose 4 or 5 stone in weight. Are there any do's and don'ts to prevent additional muscle loss? So Jodi or anyone else who's happy to speak a little about that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could give you a good answer to this, because I would work, a lot of my work with swallowing disorders are always intrinsically linked with a muscle-related dietitian, who will then look at sensible muscle weight loss, so losing weight in the right way. For a lot of our patients with OPMD, actually it's the opposite. We're trying to prevent weight loss because of the swallowing issues, and because a lot of our patients with OPMD remain potentially quite active, but with a swallowing disorder it's usually the reverse of that. So I'll hand that over to someone else who feels like they can answer it a bit better. If not, we can certainly defer it to one of our dietetic colleagues.
I think a dietitian would be the right person to ask. I agree,
Of course,
Jodi.
thank you, Jodi.
I think in general terms, obviously, if you want to lose weight, the amount of calories needs to go down, but you have to maintain that healthy balance between the different food groups. So you need to make sure that there remains enough protein in that reduced calorie diet. And I think losing weight, assuming if you're overweight and you want to lose weight, that's obviously a good thing, and I wouldn't worry about it too much in terms of having an effect on your muscle condition. I think the benefits overall would probably outweigh any minor. Just thinking about the broader benefits in terms of risk of diabetes and such like. And I think the other thing about exercise, which we touched on just a little bit, was it's not just about the muscles, it's about everything else as well. And we know one of the major reversible factors, say, affecting the risk of developing dementia in later years is around exercise as well. So I think that's a really sort of important issue that we're all sort of really interested in. Muscle matters, obviously, being here, but it can be important for other issues and sort of non-muscle issues as well.
Thank you, James, for raising that as well. That's really interesting. So what we'll do, I'll move on to a couple of other questions because there are so many. We've got quite a few on exercise still, and we've touched on various questions on that. But there was one that came in about shoulder and hip problems and weakness to swallowing and eye issues. So someone has actually asked, can these issues manifest same time as the swallow and eyelid weaknesses, or do the weakness of limbs come later, or is it different for every individual, as with many other conditions, I think? And then just the last bit to add to that, how can you distinguish what symptoms of OPMD and what are other musculoskeletal issues? So I'll open that up to the panel.
Should I? I'm happy to try and have a go at that. I mean, I think the summary is that everyone with OPMD, just as you say, Neuro, is very different. And whilst as the disease progresses, the constellation of different symptoms does kind of converge on the kind of full house of symptoms and signs. It can often start in quite a sort of localized way or a focal way, and this is one of the problems with getting a timely diagnosis. Is that one person might go to the ophthalmologist with needing an eyelid lift. Another person might go to gastroenterology with swallowing problems and weight loss, just because you've got one of the things, the signs of the other parts of the syndrome can be very subtle. I've got patients with really bad dysphagia, swallowing problems with, you really have to look carefully for any eye signs. So yeah, it can come on in different ways in different people. There was a second part. I've done the same thing as we've all done. I forgot the second bit of the question now.
That's fine. Let me have a look at it. So it said, how can you distinguish what symptoms of OPMD and what are other muscle issues?
Yeah, now that's really tricky, that's something I spend quite a lot of my time doing, really, and I'm always anxious that everything just gets put down to the OPMD or whatever other muscle disease it might be. It's a tricky one, and you often do need to seek some advice if you're not sure. I guess anything out with the usual you know, the well-known features of the disease to do with eye movements and eyelids and swallowing, you'd have to think carefully about. And obviously, just because you've got one disease doesn't make you immune from everything else. So you do have to keep a very open mind, really. I think I'd need some more specifics if we're going to talk about a specific example, but yeah, I think in general you do have to be a little bit careful not to just put everything down to the OPMD.
Brian, I wonder.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Sorry.
Of course you can.
Sorry, I'm just putting my physio hat on here. It is really difficult to identify between OPMD and you know, your other musculoskeletal problems. And I think sometimes we have noticed with many of our service users or patients that this is one of the fact. They go to the GP and often, you know, they're being told that, oh, it's just your condition, you know, that's fine. And I think what we do is, as part of that, you know, we do look quite holistically at our patients. And I think sometimes we do diagnose them, you know, having like this elbow, and then we do look quite into detail of that. And I think a lot of that is probably some more occupational therapy as well coming into that. But the fact that, you know, our service users come to us so often, you know, we kind of become their first point of contact, and we do then look into the details, look into how they work, you know, a bit of giving them ergonomic advice about working. And I just had a patient the other day who had developed tennis elbow, and we looked at her working style and then just recommended her a couple of other changes, which really helped her. Some people do get impingement, obviously not particularly mostly in OPMD we found, but other muscular dystrophies, you know, they can get some impingement, and it depends on how they use their muscles or how they use their joints, depending on the other areas of the joint which are affected, or other muscles which are getting weaker. So I would suggest, if you do have problems and if you're worried, you know, ask your GP or someone to refer you to a physiotherapist, and they can probably look into more detail about that.
Thank you, Taher. Brian, anything to add to that? You've had various experiences throughout a number of years now.
Yeah, we should still recognise that OPMD is very rare. And my sister was diagnosed 2004, and at that time, very little, I'll stand to be corrected, but very little was known about OPMD in the general neurologist sphere. So she saw a general neurologist for 18 months or more, and it was a chance conversation that somebody said, you know what, I think I've come across this before. Let me do a bit more research. So OPMD, it's only been in the last 10 or 15 years where it's become more known about. People, specialist neurologists are more aware of it being possibly a muscular dystrophy. And what I would say is the route through to getting a diagnosis is usually through the GP referral onto a neurologist who's usually familiar with MS, Parkinson's, stroke, etc., etc. And it's only that neurologist thinking beyond their level of expertise to refer on to a neuromuscular consultant, where the deck of cards starts to show its hand. And I would say that it does progress at different speeds. As I say, my OPMD, the first indications were slurred voice, particularly if I was out in cold weather. I used to do a lot of football coaching and outdoor activities. And it was like I was drunk in cold weather, and my speech was very slurred. Of course, today, I think it's very evident from you hearing me talk today that I have OPMD. I can spot somebody with OPMD very, very quickly because our voice is nasal. It's very evident that I've got OPMD, I would say, to this panel. But my muscular dystrophy, my OPMD has developed at a different rate. Droopy eyelids over the past 10 or 12 years, swallowing difficulties for which I've had the real benefit of specialist dietitian and speech and language therapist to, along with an X-ray of the swallow function, to identify the risks, to work with myself and my wife about the sort of food I should take and the consistency and texture of food and which foods to avoid. But also, one thing we haven't touched on, I guess, is the risk of respiratory complications and the fact that with a swallowing difficulty, it's all too easy for food to make its way down into the lungs. And my sister sadly had major complications, pneumonia, chest infections, which was sadly her demise. And I would say that it's really important that on this journey, the respiratory function is checked on a fairly regular basis, just so that those life-threatening symptoms can also be managed and recognised.
Thank you, Brian. Unfortunately, we haven't got any respiratory colleagues here today on the panel, but I wondered if James or Jodi wanted to add anything to that.
Just that I completely agree. I think we do have to keep our eyes and ears open for emerging respiratory muscle involvement here, and then obviously the added issues that having significant swallowing problems can bring, especially in a situation where someone might be thinking about going on non-invasive ventilation. I think it can be really difficult to tolerate that if there are significant swallowing problems. Yeah, Jodi, I don't know if you've got any comments as well.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you make a really good point, Brian. And I was just thinking as you were talking, actually, it's often the combination of the syndrome itself, the combination of symptoms that leads to another complication. So one example that I hadn't even thought of when I first started working with people with OPMD is the association between the eyelid droop and the swallowing. And I first started asking people about the eyelid droop as a speech therapist several years ago, and I think the patients thought I was a bit bonkers. And they're like, "Why is the speech therapist asking me about whether I'm going to have my eyelids surgically lifted?" And it's because often, and Brian, you might be able to help me with this, often my patients with OPMD will, because their eyelids are closing, they hold their head back so they can see. And actually, when you're trying to swallow with a swallowing problem with your head back, it makes things a whole bunch worse and the risk of aspiration and choking. And I never made those two, never linked that up before until I worked with people with OPMD. And the other question that I ask a lot with patients with OPMD, despite being a speech therapist, is about how active and mobile and whether people are off their legs. And again, it feels like you're crossing boundaries of different disciplines, but for me and my clinical experiences, if people seem to live reasonably well with dysphagia, this is a huge generalization with OPMD, but when people become less mobile and less active and they're not using their respiratory system as much as they used to do, they're not climbing hills or running marathons or running around a football pitch, their likelihood of getting a pneumonia from the things going down the wrong way on paper increases. And so I work also quite closely with a respiratory physiotherapist. Because the throat muscles are weak, your cough strength, even if the disease doesn't affect the actual breathing muscles, the coughing can become a lot weaker. So if something goes down the wrong way, trying to cough it out and clear it becomes much more challenging. So working with a respiratory physiotherapist is really, really helpful with OPMD, even if there isn't primary muscle respiratory loss, to help find ways to manage choking, manage aspiration and clear phlegm off the chest as well. So yeah, thank you for raising that, Brian. It would flipped up my to-do list.
Thank you, Jodi. So I know Brian also mentioned cough assist machines as well, which for other conditions that we know of are really, really beneficial. So I'm making the assumption that they are beneficial for OPMD if you're at a particular stage, or not really, or is it helpful when you've got an infection?
Can I just start on that one?
Of course.
It'd be very close to my heart because my sister didn't have access to a cough assist device. I think the respiratory team will look at cough augmentation techniques, and it has been the devil's own job to get these devices commissioned. It was seen as specialised commissioning and the responsibility of NHS England rather than the local CCGs. That thankfully is starting to be addressed, but I think it's really important that when there are signs of aspiration and difficulty and the cough reflux is getting weaker, that respiratory team makes the case strongly for the provision of a cough assist as and when it's required, and only that respiratory team with that level of expertise can make that call. But the CCGs in the West Midlands, who we've thankfully been able to collaborate with through the network I'm involved with and change their attitude, they were happy in the fullness of time to commission cough assist, provided that the respiratory team had given the detail around different cough augmentation techniques that had failed, etc., etc. And I think it's really important that cough assist is available as and when needed. And certainly if my sister had had access to one, she may have lived longer than she did.
Okay, thank you, Brian. That's really, really helpful. So Brian also talked about diagnosis. We've had a question about diagnosis as well. So someone's just wondering, can someone speak about when and how to be tested for OPMD? So we get lots of calls to our helpline where people haven't been diagnosed yet. They've looked on the internet, they've seen certain things. So quite an open-ended question, but I wonder if somebody could comment on that.
Yeah, can I start again on this one?
Of course, Brian.
With the charity and providing peer support, it never ceases to amaze me the number of people come forward and I talk to in the first instance through the charity that there is a likelihood of OPMD and they don't know which way to turn in terms of the next steps. And I've always advocated for the importance of a care advisor, and I've tried to talk to them about the symptoms that I presented in my case and what I've witnessed in what they're telling me. And it is late onset. It is a late onset condition. That said, I'd like to see that the detail is challenged as to how late onset it is, because I've spoken to people in their late 30s who have been diagnosed with OPMD and are starting to struggle. So I would say that in my case, it was a geneticist that did a blood test, and I got the results. It's 50-50 as to whether my two boys have got the condition. That said, one's 33, the other's 30. They're active. They're very sporty. They've chosen not to be tested, and who can blame them? Because once you're tested, of course, it has financial implications around mortgages, health insurance, and of course about the worrying concern about what might happen. We've heard today that clinical trials are progressing, and I'm pretty confident my two boys, even if they have the condition, there'll be a cure or something to stop it in its tracks. But for those here and now, I think it is important, once they've been referred and once they're seeing a neurologist that thinks it might be OPMD, for them to be tested. And late onset, as I say, I've heard of people now in their late 30s that are starting to demonstrate aspects of the condition.
Thank you, Brian. That's really, really helpful. James, did you have something to add to
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian's really covered it well, but I guess the only thing I would add is that there tends to be different scenarios. There's the patient that comes to you with symptoms of the disease, and that, you know, they are a patient in effect, and I'll try and diagnose their condition, and in the same way I would for anyone else. Then there's these more difficult scenarios where either somebody in the family has been diagnosed, and you either do have some symptoms you're concerned about, or you don't have any symptoms at all, or as Brian touched on, you know, you're quite young, and wouldn't expect any symptoms for some time. Those situations where you're not a patient, you're just a person, well, not just a person, you're a person in the community, and that is really difficult, and we really need help from our genetic counselling colleagues in that situation to think carefully about the pros and cons of having a test done, especially, unfortunately, for a disease where we don't have a specific sort of curative treatment available. That's not to say there's nothing can be done. As we know, there's certainly interventions that can help, but I think that is something that weighs into the balance here. So there is that distinction between sort of diagnostic testing and you know, genetic sort of screening, if you like, in an at-risk individual.
Okay, thank you, James. That's very interesting. There was another question to do with diagnosis and symptoms, etc. So I'm just going to cover that question, and then I think we're going to have to bring the seminar to an end. But any questions, because there are a few that we haven't answered, we'll come to the end to answer. So somebody has asked, can you inherit the same symptoms as family members who have OPMD, such as shaking, challenges to walking, and fatigue?
I mean, you can certainly, like Brian touched on, the inheritance pattern is called autosomal dominant. So you've got a 50-50 chance, roughly, of picking up the same genetic change as an affected relative, a first-degree relative. There are some uncertainties, like we were saying before. If you're asymptomatic and you have that genetic change, when or if or how severely will I manifest symptoms? I mean, is the disease the same in one family member as another? I don't think there's any kind of guarantees that will be the case. I think everyone, like we said before, everyone will have their unique presentation and features, often converging on some similar themes, particularly obviously to do with the eyes and the swallowing, but everyone is quite unique. So if you do have a relative with OPMD, it would certainly be, and you're worried about it, or if it might have passed through the generations, etc., then do talk to someone about that, and you can go through the issues with a genetic counsellor before you have any testing done, and think carefully whether you'd like to be tested.
Thank you, James. So unfortunately, that's the end of today's session. I'd like to thank all our panelists and the people who've helped guide the discussions with really good questions and comments, as well as our sponsors, PTC Therapeutics. And just a reminder that you'll be able to see these recordings and all our other Muscle Matters sessions on our website. And the recording of this session will be posted later this week. And we're also going to be in touch with a short survey just to gather some feedback from the session, which will be invaluable to shape any future sessions. I mentioned earlier on that we are doing 2 face-to-face information and support events. So if you can, they're in York and in London, so please do try to attend them. These are the first ones we're doing since pre-COVID. I think it was November 2019 where we had the last one. And then just a couple of other things to mention. We talked about OPMD being very rare, people being unsure about the condition, etc. So it would be really amazing if some of you could, if you're to share your stories to some of the participants that are online today. And the email for that is stories@musculardystrophyuk.org. So that would be really helpful for us going forward and for the community in general. I'd also like to thank some people that have joined us from other countries internationally. We do actually have on our website some muscular dystrophy international organizations as well, and we feel that would be useful because even on our helpline we do get quite a few international questions coming through, and unfortunately we are a UK charity, so we signpost to international organizations. And like I say, big apology for me, there have been so many questions. We will answer those during this week, and I'll come back to some of our panelists just to support with those questions as well. So thank you for joining us all today, and please do look out on our website for future seminars and the recordings of these ones. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.